So let's have a look at Freud versus Jung, and why that's a lot of crap, but not all of it's a lot of crap. So psychology, Freud, Jung, and all the rest. Psychology. Okay, let's do a brief synopsis of the history of psychology. Psychology is just basically thinking about other people's heads and your own head and its context and how that might work and how it affects your behaviour and thoughts and feelings and whatever else and ideas about that. So everyone does a bit of it, psychs each other out and whatever else. Okay, that is different from psychology as a science. So science requires method and operational definitions and theories and all kinds of things like that, and sort of methodological type of ways of looking for patterns amongst people and actually documenting them and things like that, and then getting someone else to compare them and the notes and see if there was any truth to it. So in a sort of accessible to the English language type of fashion, that's probably 20th century. Okay, if you talk about psychology, psychiatry on the other hand emerges somewhere in the 1800s in the English speaking world as a no comment. Okay, so psychiatry is yeah. Okay, so psychology, psychiatry is, okay, there's another video on there about sort of Jack the Ripper style behaviour that, we're not going into. There weren't actually psychiatrists that did that, but anyway. So psychology is the antidote to psychiatry, okay? We'll treat psychology as the antidote to psychiatry. Psychiatry in the Australian context is a psychiatrist is someone with a Bachelor of Medicine and a 12-month graduate diploma in counselling. Okay, so they're not a psychologist. They haven't studied psychology. They've studied colds and flus and broken arms and a crash course on how to talk to people a little bit about their feelings, and that's it. Okay. The reason why doctors, as in Bachelor of Medicine doctors, not people with doctorates, are given a bit of a heavier sort of weight in some areas is because they, everything's about medicalising things and they're sick. So the sort of pathologization of stuff that they barely comprehend and their sort of alleged mastery of it is kind of insulting, actually. Psychiatry is an insult to psychology for that reason. It's like it's like a gardener telling a baker how to do his job. It's just because the wheat was involved at some point, very briefly. It's like it really just doesn't. Like if you farm wheat, you're not a baker, okay? Okay, so just let it go. Anyway, with that psychology, okay, some that they reckon in the academic, it might have been Emmonsina, or it could have been Buddha, or it could have been yada yada yada, but they're absolutely sure, in the English speaking context, it was William James doing introspect in the late 1800s. So really started as a bunch of weird guys just sitting around going, what is thought? What are they thinking about? And doing philosophy, la da da. And then of course, if you go through the history further, there's Immanuel Kant, and there's Descartes, and there's Berkeley and Hume, and there's the philosophy of mind, and there's a way to treat psychology as a branch of philosophy. There's a way to treat psychology as a branch of sociology. There's a way to treat sociology as a branch of psychology. There's a way to treat philosophy as a branch of psychology. So there's sort of like overlapping of different ideas there. and then eventually you get to the sort of like, we're really keen on documenting this stuff in a way that makes it look like it's super, super sciencey with awesome statistics and Pearson's R and all kinds of things. And, we'll really do some cool maths on Pavlov's dogs. Way to go, B.F. Skinner. Okay, is basically the 1950s in the Anglophone context, okay? So people go, psychology's new. No one's done psychology since the 1950s. Like, okay? Not really, okay? Okay, so that's not really what it means, but okay then. Operant conditioning and social conditioning and things like that are definitely stuff you should pay attention to if you're studying why people do stuff, because they're using it on you a lot. Okay, it's behind why this channel gets no views and why other channels get lots of views, because this body, knowing what operant conditioning and social conditioning is, okay, isn't using it for marketing. Okay, they're using it to tell you what it is. Okay, and using a bit of narrative and satire and absurdism and sort of jokes about esoteric and whatever, sort of like it's like, is parapsychology LARPing as esoterica, or is esoterica LARPing as parapsychology? Either way, it's not presented in a manner that is consistent with American marketing systems. So the American marketing model associated with Edward Bernays and blah 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 blah, and associated other groups means that your algorithms will improve and you'll get more viewers if you unfuggly are made. Okay, so like whatever. Okay, the point is that, I mean, this is notwithstanding the fact that some of the videos are genuinely crap, but some are actually really good. So there's that too. Anyway, and no, there's no jealousy in that. It's an observation. See how you might come to assumptions there. What assumptions are you making as this video has been going on? Check your assumptions. It might give you some clues about the imprinting of beliefs you've gotten that aren't necessarily your own. Because if you're being fair about it, what attitudes or beliefs are actually yours? Go on. What attitudes or beliefs are actually yours? Okay? You got them, but are they actually yours? Okay. So back to the start of the video, psychology versus psychiatry, and what is psychology and stuff like that. Well, blah, 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 blah. Can't remember what the original point of it was. Okay, where did it begin? Where did it begin? Where does it begin? Where does it end? Okay, so, so psychology, okay. Oh, yes, there was something about Freud and Jung. We're going to go, what Freud and Jung good at and what they're not good at. Okay, Freud was really good at telling other people about his problems. Okay? Freud was amazingly good at telling other people about his shit. Okay? Freud was talking to everyone else about himself. And so the neo-Freudians came along and they said, well, that might be transference and counter-transference there, Sigmund. What does that mean? Well, you were gauging in a state of projection upon your patients, sir. You were saying that they were saying what you were saying about yourself, Mr. Freud. We're not entirely sure that they were saying the same thing as you were. You might be doing transference or counter-transference, which is a type of projection. And try not to get them to introject that, okay? So, in some ways, the neo-Freudians sort of took some of Freud's incredibly egotistical gloss and cult-like tendencies of the Freudian movement and improve the situation a little bit. And words that were from there are in common use today, and let's face it, overused, like narcissism, superiority and inferiority complex, projection, introjection, things like that. Okay? Superiority and inferiority complex was a guy named Alfred Adler, who was a neo-Freudian. So anyway, that means after Freud. Okay, so during the Freudian cult, so when Sigmund Freud and Jung were still buddies, back in Vienna they had a little bit of a drug den where they were getting off their face. It was the 1920s and it was the style of the time, so don't judge them for it. And when they're off their face, they acted like people off their face typically do. They sat there and they thought about what weird shit was going on in their heads. And their weird shit turned into weird theories. And they worked together for some time. And each one developing their own version of events because they were both using the method of introspection. So Freud was seeing Freud stuff and Jung was seeing Jung stuff. That's the important point that you need to understand. Freud was talking about Freud and Jung was talking about Jung. We're going to use the word type 2 generalization error. It's been overused. We're going to overuse it again, but this time we're going to use it properly. Okay? Not expandable to the general population. Not expandable to the general population. Okay? Freud was talking about Freud. Jung was talking about Jung. It doesn't necessarily say that about everyone else. There are people who it might, quote unquote, to use New Age language, resonate with, because there's some truth for that person and there's some truth for that person, but it isn't true for everyone. So that's the first point you need to understand, is for those guys, because they were doing introspection and they were talking about themselves, they aren't necessarily talking about everyone else. However, some of the ideas were taken out and tested in a more formal fashion to test for things like type 2 generalization errors. In other words, at what point does it stop being about Freud and does it become about everyone else? And at what point does it stop being about Jung and it starts to become about everyone else? And found that tricking people into adopting something that isn't theirs, which is what introjection more or less is, might be a projection that someone else is doing. Someone's projecting onto them and tricked them into introjecting. So take their stuff. They don't want it. Okay? And so it isn't always a feature of narcissism either. Sometimes it's just marketing. Okay? And propaganda and spin. Okay? And also genuine confusion on both the part of the speaker and the listener. So not everything is about narcissism. It's all about your narcissism and your infantile rage. Like it's not. It's really fucking not. It's really not. Okay? The thing about Freud is that he was not engaging in much cultural discussion. Cultural discussion was absolutely fucking vital to explain what he was observing. And he was not able to do it because the women that made up most of his client base, those proverbial women lying on couches that were experiencing transference and counter-transference, those people were not paying for the Freudian cult services. Their husbands were. And those women, here's an example, and I'm not trying to scare anyone or anything like that, okay? Some of those women were complaining that they had been, that's about the idea of repression. Now, the Freudian idea of repression is a load of shit. The id has repressed urges and fantasies that can be accessed via hypnosis. Here's why we're going to point this out. Though the client base that was used as their means to derive that idea were women whose husbands were paying for them to go there, who were complaining about domestic violence. At a time where women were being diagnosed with hysteria, here they complained about domestic violence. You know, those lovely 1800s psychiatrists were putting women like that into insane asylums in white coats and padded cells and giving them ECT because they dare spoke a bad word about their husband. Okay, that is actually something that happened. It's not something every psychiatrist did. It's not. There is reason to believe Freud also suspected that those women were reporting real cases of trauma rather than confused id impulses. Okay? So the idea of repression is crap when it's based on that data pool. That data pool is a crap data pool to work with on that subject. If you're talking about how Edwardian society, so when you're talking about the 1920s or in Europe, the reference usually in Anglophone is Edwardian because of King Edward. Um, um, the idea of them being post-Victorian, I think Queen Victoria, who was said to be so Puritan that she had a tablecloth go down to the ground just so you couldn't see the table's legs because it would be improper. You could probably assume that some kind of sociological pressure to repress expression was occurring. And so that might have been why Freud and Jung were taking drugs and having a cult in the first place, okay? They were sort of a philosophical version of the hippies, okay? And that's what hippies looked like in the 1920s when they were from demographics that were privileged. And yes, Freud was privileged because he was able to get an education at all. Now, when the Nazis sprung up, he wasn't privileged anymore. He was at risk, okay? He really was. Where he was privileged compared to other European Jews, though, is that he was a man of renown by that point, and he was therefore able to leave. Not everyone had that luxury. Jung, on the other hand, the question of was Jung a Nazi sympathiser? Not quite. Maybe later. The problem with both of those men and what they were doing is their heyday is after World War One. Their heyday is in the form of Weimar Republic. Their heyday is during the Great Depression. Okay, so all the groups that were springing up in Austria and Germany after World War One, which included Hitler's group and the Thule Society and all those bastards, were cropping up when Carl Jung was sitting there, getting off his face, talking about synchronicities and whatever else he was talking about. Okay? He wrote a book called Red Book, which is absolutely not at all the same as what's called psychodynamic theory. Okay? There's psychoanalytic theory and there's psychodynamic theory. So psychoanalytic theory and psychodynamic theory are two branches of what was called the Freudian school in Vienna, okay, which was headed by Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung initially, okay, and they've had a falling out eventually. And basically it was over this word called libido, but we'll get to that in a minute. And what's happened is that Jung in Red Book, okay, I haven't actually read Red Book, but pierced through the contents and of someone who had a copy once, and it's beautifully decorated. It's beautifully decorated, but the contents, like at the table of contents, clearly show that it's some kind of culturally contextual thing. So you cannot put it into some kind of greater context. The contents, the words are very much suited to Jung's culture, time and place, and don't seem to represent other people's. And it doesn't appear to be resembling the rest of Jung's body of work. Could have been inspired by that. The same activities could have led to both works, which you might call psychodynamic theories versus Red Book, could be sprung from the same Jung, Smoking Billy's time and space introspection shit. The thing is, though, is that even taking Red Book out of there, and then looking at Jung's theories, you'll find that things like archetypes, for example, are a lot of shit. If you do base passing through it, you can see that they're all completely contingent on the symbolism and cultural forms associated with Europe and the cultures that influence Europe. There is no reason to believe that they are representative of all of humanity's collective consciousness spaces. Take a dragon archetype, for example. Not that that's one of his archetypes, but just for argument's sake to show why that's silly. The archetype of the dragon is not a Jungian archetype, but we'll pretend it is one for 5 seconds. If you got Carl Jung to sit there in Vienna and talk about dragons, he might have heard British stories like St. George and the Dragon. He could have heard of stories from Poland about the dragon that lived in a cave. There's a story from Poland that has where a dragon lives in a cave. There's stories about dragons all over Europe, and usually it involves the dragon being slain somehow. Okay, and it may or may not involve knowledge about pre-Christian cultures having a different relationship to this idea called dragon. Okay, at that point, unless Jung was personally communicating with Manchuria or Canton, or places in China where there were the capacity for Chinese knowledge systems to travel to Vienna, it probably wouldn't have known that the idea dragon has a different perspective in Chinese culture. The Chinese, for example, seem to have a much more complex description for this dragon idea. Sometimes they're involved in the creation of the world. Sometimes they're destructive. Sometimes they're not. So they're not slain either. Okay. If there's a story about dragons being slain in Chinese mythology, and sorry, don't know everything about Chinese mythology, but what's been learnt so far is that it's not, like the same as Europe. So this Eastern idea of the dragon and the Western idea of the dragon isn't the same. And the idea, when you have a look at the other archetypes, you could probably find the same thing. There is no Christ archetype outside of Christianized groups or the groups that influence the creation of Christianity. There just isn't one. There is ideas of culture heroes, though. The idea of golden child, well, not necessarily. The favourite, not necessarily. It's sort of the myths and legends that each culture and society has is unique to their particular environment, customs, and history. It doesn't always follow that one guy sitting in Vienna off his face knew what those were just because he called it collective, because he saw a pattern that more than one group has been talking about it. He looked at the Egyptians and they talked about Horus, and they looked at Romans and they were talking about Jesus or something like that. Okay, or at some point someone was talking about Mithra or whatever. Oh, there must be some Christ archetype or whatever. It's like, well, no, not to the collective consciousness of humanity, to those groups. Okay, those are representations, since as archaeologists and historians have learned since then, of ideas that have taken different shape in different contexts until it got to Jung. So what those fellas were doing were talking about themselves and their particular context. When in Red Book, for example, Jung saw a Nazi flag. There's a story someone told about they read Red Book and they said that, Jung had a vision of predicting the Nazis. He went to hell and he saw the Nazi flag there. And it's like, well, he literally lived in like Austria and Germany when the Nazis were springing up. Do you think maybe he saw Nazi flags? I don't know. If you actually happened to live in Nazi Europe at the time, you might have seen some Nazi flags. It's not exactly a prophetic vision. All he had to do was walk down the fucking street. It's also the case that Jung was associated with the people who were dealing with the Weimar Republic soldiers in the hospitals. You know those very same people who in some but not all cases found in the Nazi party? Maybe some of those people say, Achtung Lieber, we are going to find a new group. We are not happy with their affairs. Do you like our new slogan? Do you like our new logo? And Jung's gone, And then he's gone, oh my god, we're going to hell. There's something wrong with that. Okay? So the people who've taken some kind of esotericism out of Freud and Jung and then completely taken it out of context have not done Freud or Jung justice. They haven't done psychology justice either. Okay? You can't trust the New Age movement or the chaotes or whoever it might be with their idea of shadow work. They don't know what they're talking about. Like, they don't know what they're talking about. If you talk about things like imposter spirits, or you talk about aliens, or you talk about this, or you talk about the other thing, maybe there's some AI issues or whatever, then you might get somewhere. It is possible for AI and artificial radio waves more generally, and other things to be misperceived, or to actually be acting like imposter spirits, or actually be imposter spirits. That's not ruled out. We're not saying there's no spirits. We're not saying there's no esoterica. What we're saying is that those people's appreciation of the esoterica, when informed by a misreading of both Freud and Jung, is not doing esoterica justice. It's not doing psychology justice, and it's not doing Freud and Jung justice. It's not the bloody truth. Okay? Dealing with the issue of how narcissists might be involved in Satanism, yes, do that. Because narcissists in the not bandied around sense of the term are probably people who are very unlikely to take responsibility and likely to deflect. And when they deflect, okay, that can function as a projection. People who experience imposter spirits are probably people who, before that, were prone to introjection, which means they were accustomed to being told they were at fault and accepting it. People who were prone to do that. So, in some ways, there is a sort of relationship between the narcissist and the non-narcissist. What do you call them? The NPD versus the Asperger's, when it, for lack of a better word. When it comes to certain things, they teach the Aspergians to introject. They teach the NPDs to project, and specifically the psychopaths project onto the Aspergians. Now, not everyone wants to project. Not everyone wants to introject. There are genuine cases of mistakes, miscomprehensions, lack of awareness of certain variables. Lots and lots of things required to be known in dealing with the esoteric. Because when dealing with Freud and Jung, you can branch into the esoteric as well, indirectly. Okay? Things like astral cords, bilocation mirrors, imposter spirits, what can happen to people in void states and thereafter, so on and so forth. There are lots of different ways and means that mistakes can happen. Genuine confusion is possible whether or not someone has a history of acting like a complete fucking jerk. Okay? Sometimes they might be acting like a complete jerk because they're confused as well. That's the important point to know. It's not all about a couple of buzzwords that people pulled out because it made it sound legit. okay? Pull it out of context and misused it, made it sound legit, and then everyone thinks it's all about that when it's not. There's way more to learn about how the social conditioning and attitudes and beliefs in a culturally myopic context, an opera conditioning context, led to a particular worldview and therefore behavioural outcome as well. That sounds ridiculous. It sounds like widespread use. You're overusing the word cultural myopia. You're overusing the word social conditioning. You're overusing the word opera conditioning, right? Okay, but let's put it into the context. Okay, look at the kind of things that some of those hermeticist videos are selling people. They're saying if you do their frequency video, you could be sexier and make lots of money. Okay? Oh, who's the one to do that? Well, why would you want to do that? Why is that important? It's a genuine question. Like there's not comprehension about why that's even important. Except it might be to some people. So okay, it obviously sells. Fine. Maybe it's a borderline amount. Maybe society told them that was important, so they accepted it. That sounds like social conditioning. Oh, they were showing through example, were they, that other people are rewarded with money if they're better looking. Oh, really? Oh, okay then. So what they're doing is marketing. Okay, they're saying instead of having a midlife crisis and buying that sports car, you know how they used to stereotype about selling the sports car, the big red car that goes faster. You can get a pretty young lady if you drive one. Okay, right? Some creepy 54-year-old man, a 55-year-old man can get his Ferrari and can fucking get a nice fucking 20-something-year-old lady. And it's like, well, hang on a second. Why is that? Why is that important? Right? Yeah, you check his hair plugs are falling out. See, we're making fun of one of your American celebrities at the moment. Okay, right? Okay, so what your Turkish hair plugs fell out? Now everyone can see you're bald. If you got a nice fast car, then she might find you attractive. You can take her whizzing around, eh? Have some fun, maybe. Okay, fun on one leather chair and then fun on the other, right? Right, okay. Money gets you women. Yeah. First you get the money, then you get the women. Now first you get the power, then you get the money, then you get the women. They used to say, it's like, why would you want any of them? No, they don't want you to have it because they've got it. No, they think they've got it. Define power. This is where society needs to do a bit of work. Define power. Well, you haven't done that. Define money. Okay, define money. Which monetary system are you talking about? Okay, define women. Well, you haven't really got the definition of men correct, have you? Because a man can change a dress, lose his fucking cock. In fact, a whole group of men can change fucking spiritual fucking interests and all lose their fucking cocks and still be fucking men. They'll have no capacity to do any of their gender roles. Like, none. They'll see day after fucking day that female vantage point is not the grass that's green on the other side, okay? Is that what they're fucking put through? That's revolting. Right? Okay? Right? If that was to happen, right? But they would still be blokes. Okay? So, just argument's sake, okay? Okay? So if you put it like that, okay, right? Okay, the social structures, okay, of cults to which Freud and Jung were talking about, they were a social construct Those men were operating within their own social constructs, their own narrative, their own place and time in history and space, okay, where they had their own stuff to deal with and their society had their own stuff to deal with. It wasn't generalizable to the rest of the population at all. And so a trigger, and as per usual, it was sex related. Okay? Two men had a debate over a beer one night. Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung. And I sat there in Vienna, right? Or wherever the fuck it was, somewhere near there. And they sat there gone. Freud goes, libido is sexual. And Jung says, well, no, it just seems to be a generic creative impulse. It doesn't necessarily follow that it has to be, about your wang, mate. And Freud said, but no, it is. And Jung said, well, actually, according to your theories, Jung, Freud, you're probably dealing with some kind of repression issues because you grew up in the Victorian era. It's the early Edwardian era at the moment, so you might want to deal with that. I mean, technically, Jung was younger by about 20 or 30 years, so we had different opinions. Jung was like, no, just said, no, he's a man of the 20s. It's definitely just random creative impulses. And so, with that, some aspects of each band's ideas are still relevant for us today. Libido is most certainly not sexual. It is actually just random creative impulses. Okay? But there is also the case, this interjection dynamic going on in the world needs to be addressed. That's true. And Freud was doing it all the time. So that wasn't just Freud though. In terms of intentionality, it might not be everyone else, but by consequence, it could be. The pronoun you, for example, is an example of projection and introjection behaviour, and it was actually deliberately crafted in the 1450s to create a classist dynamic through the British common law courts. So there's that to consider as well. The thing is about Jung and Freud is they spoke German, not English, so don't worry about it. The word you came from German. No, yeah, before the 1400s, but that, never mind, okay? There's other videos on the subject. So, here we go, like that, right? Okay. They fought over a word because they came from different generations with different ideas about what they were experiencing. Okay? So, if someone was raised in the 1940s or 1950s where they were told to, not air their dirty laundry and be prim and proper and whatever else, their style of repression, if not sorted out in the 60s and 70s when they were also alive, is drastically different from the cultural forms that followed in Anglo-Saxon societies afterwards. If you were born in the 1980s, okay, and you or raised in the 1980s or 1990s, how you experience this idea, quote-unquote, repression, is not what Freud was talking about, and it is not the same as what the hippies in the 1960s were talking about. Repression for people in that generation would be things like being constantly bombarded with advertising, having their minds constantly attacked by do this, do that in the form of the media in particular. So having being constantly bombarded by sound, by noise, by lights, by images, by advertising, that as a consequence of repressing people in the sense that they have to overcome the enormous weight of the Baudrillardian map that was created and chucked right in their faces through TVs, through radios, through billboards, and then later through the internet. So the Baudrillardian map, okay, changed its face from the time of Baudrillard, which was also the time of Freud and Jung, and as Baudrillard projected, got more and more detailed over time until you even have a cult in California and USA and people, those guys, Elon Musk and all them dickheads, okay, taking the Matrix movie a little bit too seriously and then flooding everyone with AI, okay? That kind of crap is those people were bombarded with their own, version of a Baudrillardian map, which was containing all kinds of weird crap, and other people, other societies had different ones, okay? The mission system in Australia ended in the 60s. Apartheid in South Africa ended in the 90s. Without being rude, there's a lot to recover from in Australia, but they've got a 30-year head start. So they might have 30 years extra wisdom on dealing with it, maybe, that South African bowlers, for example, don't have. That don't necessarily have a real you can see it. You can see it with the way it's like, are they telling the truth, or are they trying to sell something? And a lot of what comes from the United States is them trying to sell something. And so, United States of America, you're a map, not terrain. You don't make any sense. I mean, Bogan Society in Australia never made any sense. The Yanks might keep on less. And don't know what to say to that, except that everyone's insane. They're just mad. Like, you can just look around and just see that they're fucking nuts. They're completely nuts. And they're being driven nuts by technology. They're being driven nuts by constant sell shit. Like, even as, like, they have the artificial radio waves going through the air, so, like, oh, your skull protects you, but no, it don't. Your skull's thinner than the wall that it passed through. It's hitting you. You got ways of blocking it off, right? But it's hitting you. You're feeling it. Are they telling you buy, sell? Is it your map? Whose map is it? We don't know anymore. We do know is whatever mathematical constructs they've put into the AI, it's based on their cultural myopia, their misidentification, their own constraints, resource-wise, as well as business-wise, and projections of ideas based on assumptions they've made that may or may not be accurate. And that's not the end of the story, but that's wisdom to give you about the story. And we don't know what to do about it. We just know that that is a thing, a place to look, maybe.